I'm Jason Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Hornady Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Seth, and a special episode for you today. Joining me at the table to my left, Vice President Jason Hornady. Jason, thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here.
And I said kind of a special episode because we've got a special guest.
We do.
And it's a legend within the industry, certainly a former employee and personal mentor of yours. So please help me in welcoming Ken Berger to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, Ken. We're looking forward to it. We've heard a lot of stories internally about Jason and about you, and just appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's fun to be here. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Give you a little background on Kenny. Kenny started a rep group called Sportco Marketing. Before that, he worked for one called JL Trabue. And a lot of people don't understand that most of the companies in the industry use independent sales reps, and they'll each have a territory. And Ken was part of one of the super groups, and they had a whole bunch of different lines. So they don't just represent Hornady, but they had Shimano, and they had Bushnell and Nikon, and I think he had Igloo for the country at one point in time.
Had Igloo, had Plano.
Oh, wow. And he's also
Thompson Center.
Yeah.
Dan Weston, Charter Arms.
I bet you can keep going for probably 100 lines. And before that, he was one of the long-term guys at Remington. So there's a whole bunch of these guys in the industry that came out of the Remington days. But Ken also taught me how to shoot a shotgun and how to sell stuff. And I worked for him for 5 years, and it was a great education. And I still call him when I need help.
Awesome. So yeah, what a great mentor to have. And I think that's going to be a good point to talk about is what sales and how distribution works. A lot of end users, consumers, they'll go to a store, they see Hornady ammo on the shelf, and they buy the ammo, but they don't understand what takes it from us as the manufacturer to that store shelf. So explaining that and explaining what that looks like is going to be great. But before we get there, we got to know a little bit more about you, Ken. So let's rewind the clocks to kind of where you grew up, what you were doing growing up.
I grew up in Connecticut, and a lot of I had some relatives, et cetera, that worked for Remington Arms Company. And ever since I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to do was hunt and fish, really. Mm-hmm. And I guess I used to hunt blackbirds and sparrows with a Daisy air rifle. And there's an interesting story of when I was 12 years old. My grandfather lived next door to us. Kind of a family complex that was in Connecticut. And my family got out of the dairy business. And my grandfather at that time was an old fellow, and he used to sit on the porch over there, and every day I'd go over to see him. And I went over there one day when I go home from school, and he says, did you ever shoot a shotgun? And I said, no. And he said, well, here, I want you to shoot this. And he had an old Hopkins & Allen falling block shotgun that was the farm gun my father remembers when it was there when he was born. And so he got out a shell and put a piece of board up against a tree, and I shot at it. And he says, that's good. He says, now, gave me a handful of shells, and he says, I want you to get down over back and sit on a stone wall, and when a squirrel comes along, kill it for me. So, boy, that was my introduction to hunting.
All right.
So I started it, and I went down, and I killed a squirrel or two until somebody told my father about it. Oh, that was the end of that. My father raised the devil about him, and that was the end of my hunting with that. Interesting antidote to that is probably after my grandfather died. He died in 1953, and that old gun that was laying around the farm for years and years that had a homemade stock on it, etc., was in the farmhouse over there. And when I was working for Remington, I was down to visit my folks one day next door, and the uncle, they were painting the house, and they found that old gun, and they brought it over and gave it to me, and I still have that home hanging in my office.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was my introduction to hunting. But then as time went on, I started hunting by myself, and that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I got out of high school. First of all, I thought I was going to be a baseball player, but I got shot in a hunting accident when I was about 18, and that messed me up for 6 months, a year. My father finally said, "You got to go to work." So I went to work with an hunting company, and I didn't want any part of that. And at the same time, I had an uncle who ran the old Lordship Gun Club at Lordship, and he got me introduced to shooting trap and skeet. And that's what I started to shoot. I could shoot out there those days for 25 cents a round, targets and shells.
When he said, 25 cents a round, he means the whole round.
Yeah, the whole round.
For
we
targets
shot
and shells.
Slightly imperfect shells, but that was the way it was. And and that was my introduction to shooting sporting clays and shooting clays, period. And from there on, I didn't know what I was going to do. And this job at the awning company, I hated. I said, I got to go to school. I wasn't a very good student, really. Well, I didn't apply myself, but had a strong back. And I decided I'd go to a gunsmithing school in Trinidad, Colorado.
Oh, yeah?
So I went to Colorado in 1955, I think. 1955. And went through there, and I played baseball down there. And when I graduated from there, I went to the University of Northern Colorado to play baseball. And I used to go, summers I used to spend my time in Newcastle, Wyoming, playing baseball. They used to take us up there and supposedly give us jobs to do, and we'd play baseball 4 or 5 nights a week. And it was a lot of, made pretty good money, et cetera, for doing that. And then when I left there, I got married the senior year in college, and then I got drafted. Went in the Army, spent 2.5 years in the Army. Went to all the schools I could. Went to jump school, Pathfinder school, everything you can think of. I graduated from OCS and went to the 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell. We were the liaison group attached to the division. And I got out of there finally, and on my way, went home and went to work for Remington. Remington shipped me to Ilion, and I was up there, worked for them there for 2.5 years, and I had great hunting and fishing up there. I liked that, but I wanted out in the field. I didn't want, so because I was a shooter, they transferred me to the marketing department and sent me in as a field rep in Ohio. And that's where I really started in the business, the sales business, etc. And I worked at that for a number of years, and all of a sudden I realized it financially it wasn't what I wanted. And
one way to put it.
Yeah, that's and I had made friends with a rep that was there, and he only had a 2-man group, and he wanted to get into the fall business, and so he hired me, and I left Remington in 1969 in August, and went on and worked for them for 22 years, and finally things got out of hand a little bit, and got together with a couple of other fellows, and we formed our own rep group, and Hornady gave us the line, and we got several other lines, but and here we are today. And then Jason, where did Jason come in? Well, I used to come out here and hunt quail and pheasants. I don't remember what year it was. Do you remember what year that was we went hunting up?
I wasn't there when you guys got it.
Yes, you were.
Was I?
Yeah.
Well, that had to be in the 80s.
You were still in college.
Yeah, so that would have been late 80s.
Late 80s. And we stopped in a bar for lunch, and we talked to the people, and we were hunting out with Doug Durner. And at that time, I realized and listened to Jason. I hadn't really been around Jason for a long time, but Jason was one of those people who could get conversation out of a telegraph pole. And I said, that's the kind of guy we'd like to have. I'd like to have. So it went on, and I understood that Jason was graduating from college, and I called him up. And I don't know if he was very surprised or not, and asked him if he wanted a job. And came to work for us.
I was surprised
Yeah.
and excited. And jobs weren't that easy to come by. At the
Right.
time.
Yeah. You graduate college, you think you got to do some legwork.
You got to do something.
And it was a good time, though. Jason came and
We had a great time.
Stayed with my wife and I for a little while he got settled and found a place to live, etc. There's some other stories that can be, we won't get into that. But it was good all along the way. And here we are right now with Hornady. And I remember the first day that I walked into the Hornady downtown, and I was telling Jason they had 90 employees.
Wow.
We were just coming with pistol bullets at that time, and that was my start with Hornady. But that goes back in talking about how the way things used to be done. We used to do, it was called grassroots. Your father believed in this. And we called on the dealers, we called on the distributors, and we took inventories, we made recommendations. I called on one distributor who became a very, very large distributor that he didn't keep any records at all. And I went in there one day and I had made up my own inventory cards. And I'm in there doing these inventory cards, and he came over to me, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm taking inventory." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Those inventory cards." He said, "Where'd you get those?" I said, "I made them." He said, "Don't you show those to anybody." No, because back in those days, it was really hand to hand, and it was hands-on, everything. We took inventories, we went in, we wrote orders, we made recommendations, and then on the weekends, lots of times, and this came from my old Remington, we worked shoots, and we did promotions, and we went to there, we went here, and I can remember one year that I worked 27 weekends.
Oh, boy.
Away at shows or at things of this nature. But the whole business has changed completely now. In fact, it's changed in the past 5 years. You can attest to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Certainly in the last 10, it's changed. But funny things that I remember Kenny and Charlie Duncan and a couple of the other old names or not old names, but when I was little, they'd all come to town for planning meetings. And so we'd go over to my grandparents and I'd meet all these guys. And that's when you learned that you had to.
I used to sleep in his bed.
He used to sleep in my bed, but I can remember coming home excited from grade school because Kenny and some of those guys were going to be there. And at one point in time, he and I played kickball out in the front yard with my grandfather and my father. And I mean, I was 6 or 7 years old and had all these guys playing kickball with me. And it was like, I thought I was king of the world.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. So going back to the sales portion of it, you mentioned distributors and dealers. Let's talk through what that looks like. Like I said earlier, you got a guy that buys it at the store shelf. What's the process of getting it from the manufacturer to the store shelf? And where do you come in?
It'd go for the manufacturer. Back in those days, it was on both sides. We worked both sides of the fence, really.
Okay.
But we didn't talk about that. We sold some people who we didn't want them to know we sold, and we didn't tell this guy we were selling them. And that's the way that thing worked. And we sold the larger dealers or the real good aggressive dealers. We used to sell them direct. Okay. And then we had the distributors, and we sold in. But still, the distributors before the computers came into being, we did it all. We'd go in there and take their inventories. We'd sit down with them. We'd go through this and that, and we'd write an order, and then I'd phone the order or send it in to mail it in. That's before we even had fax machines, and then we had fax machines, and then we put it through the fax machine, and that speeded things up a little bit.
Yeah.
But we still had to do, and I still believe in it, some people don't, you got to get out there and do the grassroots and let people know who you are. You don't want to let them forget you.
Right.
Got to make sure you're there, and don't fall behind, and don't burn any bridges behind you.
Yeah.
Words to live by.
And part of what he's referring to is they would go in and sell it to the distributor.
Okay.
The distributor would bring it in, and then Kenny would have those of us that were out in the field even more so, and our job was to go out and sell it to the dealer for the distributor. And so we were kind of doing everything along the way where, okay, first we sold it for the factory, then and bought it in a lot of cases for the distributor, and then we'd go sell it for the distributor to the dealer, and then, as he mentioned, shoots and retail events, and then you'd stand at the dealer's shelf and you'd sell it for him too.
Wow.
So you were working the whole
thing.
the whole chain. You had the snake from nose to tail.
Really. And I know, Jason, you and I talked about this briefly here just the other day. At the manufacturer level, especially when you're going back into the 60s, 70s with a company like Hornady, you couldn't employ a sales staff because you didn't have the resources.
Yeah, the whole thing for sales reps and agencies like Sportco and Trapshooting is we couldn't afford to have 50 guys around the country selling stuff. Hornady didn't have the money. I don't know, how big was Hornady when you started there? Probably 10 million maybe in gross sales?
Very small. I'm not really sure about that.
Yeah.
But I tell you only had 90 employees.
Yeah. Would you remember what year that was?
1969. I can tell you exactly what it was. It was December of 69 when I first came out here, and we stayed in the Texaco, was it Texaco?
Conoco.
Conoco.
The Conoco Motel
downtown.
Yeah.
And it was
Still
snow
there.
on the ground. And
It's still there. We wouldn't put him in
Yeah,
that
we-
hotel.
No, you wouldn't. So that's a good point, though. You get a company of that size growing with a good product, and you can't afford to employ, like you said, 50 or 70 people out there on the road. So a company like yours can come in and represent the company along with several others and sell it for the manufacturer to a distributor, and then the distributor sells it to the dealer, and the consumer goes to the dealer to get the product on the shelf.
And he would go into his big customers, and he would start with maybe the Hornady buyer, and then he'd go to the office next to him,
Yeah.
and that'd be the Bushnell buyer, and then he'd go to the office next to him, and it'd be the black powder buyer.
that's the way. Or sometimes the same guy bought several lines.
Sure.
And we stand here, we work with him for 3-4 lines. Then we go to the next office and work with them for a while till we get everything done. And that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
It's not that way anymore.
Yeah, sometimes not, but a lot more of it's done.
Done by the computer, yeah.
But I think it all is probably done with healthy relationships. And that's what you're really paying
absolutely,
for.
Absolutely.
Is
That's
like you said, not burning bridges.
Don't burn any bridges. Then you know you get a lot more bees with honey.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes, you do.
than with vinegar. So
Yeah.
One of the favorite lines that Kenny used was, "Don't be careful whose toes you step on today. It's attached to the ass you're kissing tomorrow."
yeah.
That
That's
is
ingrained in my
Or
brain.
the other one is don't criticize the Indian until you walk a mile in his moccasins.
Yeah, very true.
Yep.
So you're paying for those relationships and that network to help get your products out there. And so in 1969, much smaller product line, not doing a ton in sales volume comparatively today anyway. If you would, tell us, what was it like in 1969 as a company? What was working with Joyce like? What was kind of the culture of the company at that time?
Well, it was a little different. We as I say, we sent most of our orders in by mail, and things really happened. And I used to be always on the phone because I always wanted to get stuff. And they had a lady working in the office that didn't make any difference if you sent in an order for 10 boxes, it got put on a pile, and the next order was for 5,000 boxes. The 5,000 box order didn't get any priority over the other orders, and I didn't think that was right. And we used to have a lot of conversation about that. And then of course things really changed. The bullet line came along, and we kept adding more and more bullets and getting the products that these guys developed. And then after the accident, when your grandfather and the boys went into Lake Pontchartrain, things got kind of crazy because I felt sorry for your dad really at that time, because Steve was thrown into a complete abyss, because he was all of a sudden had the responsibility of the whole thing on his shoulders. And you know your grandfather, he didn't let anybody do anything before he did, or he was very conservative. And I have to give Steve a tremendous amount of credit, and your grandmother, who was a big help in doing that, getting this thing back and putting it on on the road that it is today. And from there on, I really, I don't know how to say this, but I think that after your dad took over and the things, that's when the growth really came. The growth really started. You were in the ammunition business with the Frontier line before, and we sold a lot of it. And the ammunition line, your grandfather used to say, we just want to make enough to make a little money. We don't want to upset anybody. We want to do a niche market. And that's basically where the ammunition thing started.
And why did he say that?
Because it was true.
Well, it was true, and he was selling all the other guys' bullets.
He was selling all the other guys bullets too. We thought about that too, and the other guys didn't really think about it, you know. And after about, I remember one of my old Remington guys, in about 1990 or so, after we had really gotten going in the ammunition business and doing, as I say, that niche market, making stuff anybody else didn't want to make, and making what we had better. I had a cousin who was a district manager for Remington, and he said to me, he says, the boys are saying Cousin Ken is kind of getting into our drawers a little bit here, because we were selling a lot of ammunition, and more than what anybody realized, and we were getting it done, and they were getting it done by having the best product out there. I mean, this stuff, they used to tell me, you open a box of Hornady, and it looks like jewelry.
What a compliment.
You open a box of some of this other stuff, and it's dull and drab, and you know, that's the way it went, and things progressed since there, and here we are today, and doing what you're doing now. And it's hard for me to believe in coming out here now and looking at what's around us and what's happened and what's done. And I retired in 2005.
Good.
Kind of semi-retired.
Noticeably the year before I started here.
Okay.
I think he did that on purpose.
Well,
I don't think he ever wanted to work for me.
no, but I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, he didn't want phone calls coming the other way. I got it.
But I still did some things after that. I worked for some people and did some other things. But essentially, I retired from my company in 2005. But looking at things now and seeing things that are going, and when I got out and when I left, I knew several of the large distributors that we had, that Hornady was the number one metallic line. Now that's hard to say when you had, back in the old days, you had two lines really. You had Remington and Winchester, and then Federal was far behind. Now you look where it is. Now Hornady, in many distributors, is right at the top of the pile.
Yeah.
The top of the pile as far as metallics go. And it's because of the hard work all these guys put in. And I got to give your dad a lot of credit for the way he came along. And also when you came in. You came in and added new blood and brought the thing on. And, you know, I really wanted that to happen. And I used to call Steve up and say, you know, time you hired Jason again. Again, well, that's another story. But
Yeah.
You can tell that one when I'm not sitting here.
Yeah.
But,
well, there was a lot of product development that happened
tremendous.
in the 80s and the 90s. In the 80s, you had the XTP bullet, the pistol bullet, the VMAX first tipped polymer varmint bullet, and what a home run that turned out to be.
absolutely. Oh, boy.
And that was fun. And Ken, I bet if he called my dad one time about those bullets, he called him 2,000 times and wore him out.
Well,
What were the conversations like? Like, we need to make more of these?
You need to make this. We used to do things, and the rep business used to be, my feeling on the rep business was when I represented Hornady, okay, when I was in a client's room, I was Hornady, and I was there, and everything they passed on to me. And lots of times you look and you listen, and you pick up little things out there that they should know. And I don't see the reps today do that. I don't think they go in and they search for answers and try to get things. And because essentially we're their CIA in the
fly
field.
on the wall.
Right, we're the fly on the wall. And the same thing with shows. too many times the guys at the shows spend too much time in the bar talking and not listening. I used to tell him that. Yeah.
Yep. You learn a lot there.
Yeah.
And what where that all started was at that time, Nosler's ballistic tips were just going crazy.
Oh,
Yeah. It's a good bullet.
It's a good bullet.
It was a good bullet. Yeah, it was the best there was then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sexy and different, and we didn't have it. And as there is all, I mean,
We used to call him up, and finally I said we were gonna have a sales meeting, and I think I called Charlie and a couple of the other guys in. I said let's get how much information you have and find out from your major distributors how much of this stuff these guys are selling. So we did, and I got it from 4 of the big distributors I had in my territory at that time, and the numbers were earth-shattering.
Yeah.
So we came to the meeting, and I think your dad started off the meeting and said, "No, we're not going to have a tipped bullet." And we started passing the stuff around, and gotten into the conversation, and he looked at the numbers. And a month later, we had tipped bullets.
Proof's in the pudding.
it was
and
for
the best one out there.
Yeah.
it was for the wholesale show of 1994. And they had them piled up on a table because that was one of the other issues is nobody could get the other brand. And so there was always commentary about, well, you just can't get them. And, well, are you guys going to be able to make them? So they rolled into the show, and they had a table about this big around, and it was coffee table height. And they had bullets stacked on there, and they gave every customer a box of bullets. And I'll never forget walking around the corner, seeing the competitor sales manager holding a box of our bullets, and he was on his cell phone calling back and talking. I'm pretty sure he was talking to the factory back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, and essentially, the first year we murdered them. I mean, we went from here to here, just like this.
Yep. And we actually just released a podcast here just a few weeks ago about the VMAX bullet that really started our polymer tipped line. And now when you look at our bullet sales and even our ammunition sales, a projectile with a polymer tip is just the right way to do it.
And things like the Revolution came along, and absolutely great.
Yeah. And thanks for bringing that up, Ken. In 1994, 95, 96, we had senior ballistic scientist Dave Emery kind of help spearhead the VMAX line. And then you just mentioned the Lever Evolution line with the FTX bullet, the SST. Dave really did a lot for our company as far as new product development goes between bullets and cartridges. On the sales side, what was that like seeing Hornady in 1969 with our products that we had then to fast forward to the 90s and 2000s where we had these amazing product developments? What was that like?
when you went in in 1969 and in 1970, you were selling a bullet line of what you had, and a lot of people weren't. There was a lot of lead orders, but they didn't have, back in those days, they didn't have the powders, they didn't have the case making technology that we have today, and didn't have all the stuff we have today. And you were just selling a product line and trying to convince them to buy more Hornady bullets. And in essence, nobody else really had anything else except Nosler had the petition. And that was the big thing everybody thought was the best big game bullet, etc. Remington had a core lock, which was a core lock, and but when all of this new stuff started to come along, you'd get excited and you could go in there to the distributor and show them, look what we got this, look what's happening, and it just seemed like this stuff came so quickly and on. And the other thing that I got to give your dad credit for all going out and getting the engineering staff that he has, and which I think is the best in the world. Because I got to spend quite a bit of time with some of them when I used to go to Iowa, etc. And really a great bunch of people, and most dedicated bunch of engineers, I think, in the whole industry.
Yeah.
And when they talk to them and they talk amongst themselves, they don't talk about girls or golf. They talk about shooting. And what's this? 1,000 yards? Okay, let's try this. A great bunch of guys.
Yeah.
And I got to give your dad credit for that, going out and getting these people, and the college project that he had going, and bringing the trainees in the summertime. Do you still do that?
Oh yeah, we still do that.
That's a
And
great
We just
program.
had Alex Hornady in as an
Yeah,
intern.
that's
Yep.
a great program.
he wasn't an intern. He was just a grunt.
Okay.
He'll be
yeah,
a grunt
yeah.
again this summer. But and I would say that that's not just engineering either. It's our sales agent or our sales group, our marketing group, even manufacturing. You don't hear them talking a lot about football in the hallways. You hear them talking about hunting and shooting and
Yeah, matches.
Bullets, new powders, propellants, what's going on? Hey, what about this? What about that?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that goes a long way. I've worked in several different areas at this company, and what I can say echoes just what Jason said, is that in every department I've been in and everyone that I go talk to, we're talking shooting matches, hunting season, tag strategies, trying to get different permits and 1,000-yard matches, and just all of the things. That's what we come to work and we're passionate about, and that passion, I think, translates to the better products.
Well, it's the fact that, when I used to try to tell all of our guys that we had working for us as reps, you got to belong to gun club, you got to shoot, you got to do this. We had the old agency that I belonged to, the main recreation was golf. And, I talked to Al Minimum from MTM, and we used to do this shoot at the SHOT Show. You never got involved in that. We used to have a shoot at the SHOT Show, a sporting clay shoot wherever we were, and we'd go, the sad part about it, more guys that show up for the golf tournament than the shooting sporting clays. But that's the way the industry became, and the industry became more influenced by people from outside, I think. Back in the 50s and 60s, when I was around the Remington people, and I've been around pretty all my life, they were all interested in that. When they brought, they talk about shooting. You want to shoot? Go shoot skeet. Go shoot trap. Go shoot a rifle. Go shoot. Do this, and the new breed of people that came into the shooting sports industry weren't of that nature. A lot of them are more interested in playing golf or scuba diving or doing this or doing that, and I think it's what happened is the outer world found out how much money could be made in the shooting sports business. So look what happened when DuPont started sending the paint people and such into the Remington. That was the demise of Remington as far as I was concerned.
Really? So talking about like you said, the demise of Remington, you've repped a lot of groups, or a lot of companies rather. Have you seen some start off like Hornady, for example, that started off relatively small and then grow up to be a big player? And then what ones have you seen that were big players initially that have maybe gone down? What are some of those companies look like?
Ithaca, U.S. Repeating Arms, gosh, I can't think.
Redfield,
Thompson Center, all were major companies in the business, and then all of a sudden, Thompson Center's all but disappeared. I used to say there was 3 companies that we represented that had the best product service and were the easiest companies to work for and most reliable, and that was Thompson Center and Hornady and MTM. All really family-owned companies, not owned by a conglomerate.
Right. I suppose there's something to be said there about that.
Yeah. And the loyalty disappears, I think.
Sure.
Within that time. So I don't know if I should be saying that, but I did,
Yeah. Well, you experienced it. You lived it. And
and I saw what happened. I saw what happened at U.S. Repeating Arms when we represented U.S. Repeating Arms when they were still in New Haven and having very difficult problems. And it was a good time for me because of the fact that I visited New Haven a lot, and I used to go through the factory, find stuff. Find 50 receivers, and they'd make those up and sell them to Jakeway, or make things happen. And when they were bought out again, and the ownership was transferred to another large company, disappeared.
Yeah, and for just point of clarification, U.S. Repeating Arms was Winchester.
Winchester guns.
Winchester
guns.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can remember having been work for Remington and then sitting up there, which I never thought it ever would happen, at the big conference table in the Haven in Winchester, selling Winchester guns and everything. But
Well, let's go back a little bit. You mentioned, we talked about it briefly, Jason came to work for you right out of college, and you knew Jason as a 6 and 7 year old
I
playing
knew
in the
him,
front yard.
and I knew him as he grew up. And I said, anybody that can talk to a telephone pole, I said, I'd like to have him work for me. And he went to work for the first thing I did with him, we went and did a promotion. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
At Advance of Sporting Goods in Columbus, Ohio. Yeah. And that's where he got his indoctrination. And
Fastest way to learn your product line is at a consumer
that's
promotion.
right. That's exactly right.
Because the consumer doesn't care about
Well,
you or your brand.
if you don't know
it.
it, he'll tell you.
Yeah. Yep.
And then, of course, some of the other learning experiences were at the time we spent at the Grand American.
Grand American, also in Nelsonville at an archery shoot.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
But I used to have to go work trap shoots for Ken, and we would reload shotgun shells. And
Oh, boy. On the 366?
Yep. And the Apex.
And the Apex, too. The Apex, And the Grand American was really that was a fun experience and a learning experience because you had about 120,000 people come through a small concentrated area in 10 days. And it was really, it was fun. It was a good time. I used to call it the biggest shooting flea market in the world. And that's exactly what it was. Because everybody was there, and you knew everybody, and everybody got along together. And it isn't that way anymore since they moved it out of there.
Sure.
Everything is so spread out. You could be there a week and not see anybody.
You met every kind of consumer at those things. You met the nice and easy to do business with, and then you met the one who brought in a reloader that he'd taken a hatchet
axe to. I
remember
that.
Remember that?
Oh, that's a real story.
It's a real story.
Take an axe to it. Mm-hmm. And we had we redid the building one time, and the first thing that I insisted on us doing there was putting in a mirror that was a one-way glass, so we could be in the office in the back and see who came in. If we didn't want to talk to them,
send somebody else out.
You always knew that you were in trouble when all of a sudden you looked around and every single coworker is not standing on the floor with you, and here came that guy. Oh no!
But you really used to get them.
Yeah.
And then the year we did the popcorn, you remember that?
Go ahead.
Well, Steve decided that one year we wanted to do something to bring people in the building, okay? Because I had done a promotion the year before, I think, where we represented Accurate Powder at that time. And 2 days a week we gave away free half-pounds of Accurate Powder. And we started at our building, and we had lines that were 200 yards long.
Yeah.
And so, all right, so we're gonna give away popcorn. So your dad must have sent in 20 bags, big bags,
50-pound bag,
50-pound bags of popcorn from somebody out here.
Hell, they might have been 100-pound. I don't know how big they were.
They were heavy, anyway. So, and we rented a popcorn machine. So we were gonna find somebody to run the popcorn thing and do the popcorn thing. And all of a sudden, and what did you had somebody lined up and they didn't show up?
Mm-hmm. We had a couple cute girls from Columbus that didn't show up. So the cute girl that was running the popcorn machine was
looking
him.
good.
And then we got a young boy to do it. I can't remember what that kid's name was.
I don't remember.
His father was a shooter.
Okay.
And he came by. But now here's the popcorn went over absolutely great.
Who doesn't love the smell of free popcorn? I bet that brought a lot of people in.
After the second day, ATA management was down talking to us because there was popcorn from one end to the other.
That's true.
Almost like a polite cease and desist kind of deal.
Oh boy! But we gave away the popcorn.
We gave away a lot of popcorn.
We gave away a lot of popcorn, and I think I gave popcorn to everybody in Madison County, and we still had some left over.
Yeah, that was the unpopped popcorn. We
had
so much.
We popped it right there.
Yeah.
Oh boy!
Well,
That's how I learned how to clean a popcorn machine, which I hope to never do again.
no. Aside from Jason being able to talk to a telephone pole, what are some other redeeming characteristics, or was work ethic or his character that drew you to him to help mold as a salesman?
I am sitting right here.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
It was his words.
to be a
not mine.
salesman, you got to be able to talk to people.
Sure.
And you got to be able to thoroughly understand people and know when to get mad, when not to get mad. And to, as I say, don't burn any bridges behind you. And even if you get really ticked off at somebody, you best to hold that back, because I can tell you a story about one of Pacific's former employees and a former employer here at one time that in Harley Bear. Do you know that story about Del Grimm?
Mm-mm.
About Del Grimm saying he'd never work again for Harley Bear, and when he left here, that's who he went to work for.
You're going to have to back up on that story a little bit, because
Okay.
nobody here knows what
Yeah.
Bear
Well, that
is.
was the
Well, I
old.
know Bear.
That was the old. When Joyce bought Pacific,
Yeah, Pacific
which was, I
Reloading
thought was
Tools.
great, you know,
Yep.
and brought it in here and had Bob Dietmar was running it, etc. And when Bob left, they brought Del Grimm in. I believe this is right.
This is all pre-Jason.
And Del Grimm's Del Grimm won the Grand American one year, and but he had said I had worked several promotions with him, and when he came here and was working here, I'll never forget when we first got the tool line, and we weren't selling tools. We were back, and then the SHOT Show was big reloading thing. And I went to Paul Wamas, and I said, Paul, we need to do something to get this thing going. And he says, okay, get me an extra 5%, and I'll take 100 machines. Well, that blew their mind. and I sent the order in, and I soon got a phone call from Doug Grimm, want to know what I was doing. I was destroying the distribution. Anyway, that's another story. But anyway, that's when we really got the 366 off the ground and really going. And we sold a lot of loaders. We used to sell 100 loaders at the Great American.
Wow, just at the Grand American.
Yeah, just at the Great American. And we always ran a little promotion with them, and gave away a jacket, or 1 year we gave away. You're also represented West Coast Lead at the time.
Yep.
And I got Pete to make up little 5-pound bags of shot, and I got Remington to give us a big tub of cases, and I asked Winchester for them, and that's another story too. But, anyway, we gave away 50 once reloaded Hills, a box of 100 primers, which Remington gave us, and a bag of Hornady wads, which you had wads at the time, and a bag of shot. You bought a loader, you brought your receipt down, and we checked it off and gave you a starter kit.
Wow.
And,
Yeah, it'd probably easy to move loaders. With
oh
that kind
boy,
of
we
incentive.
sold a lot of loaders. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of loaders doing that way. Yeah. But it was fun, too. We used to have
Yeah.
a lot of fun there.
Sounds, listening to these stories over the last little bit here, sounds like a lot of working in that environment at that level of sales. You have to be creative, and you kind of had some freedom.
You got to be creative. You got to do some things. You have to, do something else that nobody has done before. Or we used to do a beer promotion at times too. When that
I wasn't there for that one either.
Oh.
I wasn't there for the really fun ones.
Yeah, the funny. Yeah.
and then I coupled Hornady with one time with 10X, and we gave away Tom Carlson gave us I think he gave us a jacket or something for if you bought a Hornady loader.
Yeah, we did jackets.
Yeah,
we did
yeah.
shooting vests. We did,
Shooting vests, and we had a whole lot of things we did. But you had to have something to draw the people in, and and we were fortunate because a lot of the people that we were working on the other side of it, our competitors, didn't do that.
Sure.
And you know,
That was
Back to your creativity.
Yeah.
that moved the needle.
yeah, it moved the needle just a little bit, you know. And but there's a lot of things in the business that used to happen that don't happen anymore that were a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we used to be tired after the Grand American. We're glad to get out of there. You thought if your face would break if you made one more smile.
Yeah.
Schlepping lots of bags of shot and lots of loader.
Well, you mentioned Doug Durner earlier in the podcast, and I sat beside Doug and learned a lot from him in the years. And if I ever had a question about a 366 or a customer called in and this was going on, what do you think this is? You didn't even have to wonder who to go to. You could just go ask Doug, and he would. Oh, yep. He rebuilt them, loaded on them.
Yep,
at the
we
Grand
spent a lot
American.
of time, and you know, I used to say I knew as much about the 366 as anybody, and I get phone calls. Yeah, people come fix the loader. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's like believe this or not, I still get people bringing me 1100s to fix.
Wow.
And so the whole deal, too, is at the Grand American, and we're talking about that more than I ever thought we would because I've tried to forget it. But the whole program was if you bought a loader and you brought it to the Grand American, we'd service it for you.
Oh, sure.
And so what would happen is we'd have loaders stacked up, and as soon as the chute closed and we'd roll the front door down, we'd all stand in the back and fix loaders until midnight. You know, there might have been a beer or two while we were working on
Chicken Sanders.
Yeah.
Chicken Sanders.
Kentucky Fried Chicken and some beers and all hands on deck fixing loaders because we'd have 50 of them.
We'd
at a
have
time.
50, 60 loaders at a time.
Oh, wow.
And
That was for 10 days.
Really not bulletproof, but I mean, that unit's such a well-built machine. It can still, it needs loads.
There
the
are
seat,
some
charge
people
bar seals
that
and
should
stuff.
never put their hands on a loader. Trust me.
The problem was never the machine; it was the person operating the machine.
Sure.
Usually,
We used to get some of them in. We tell them to take it down to the car wash before you bring it in here.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you guys spent a lot of time together doing some fun stuff before the digital age kind of changed some of the relationships and the networking. Ken, I want to ask you this question. Jason has referred to you internally as one of his strongest mentors. What do you think are some of the biggest lessons that Jason learned from you?
Well, one thing I think he learned a little bit that one of the things that we had with Jason was Jason wanted to run things most of the time. Okay, well that was fine, but it all happened. One of the biggest problems I had with Jason went to work for me, was working for me for 2 weeks, and it was a very difficult thing for me to do. And Steve called me up, and he wanted to take Jason on a hunting trip. And I said, Steve, he said, I know this is very difficult. I said, Steve, I can't do that. If I got 15 of the guys, what am I going to tell them? So that got by the boards. And then do you remember this? One time when AccuSport had their deal going, and we were at the Grand American, and your dad came in for this festivities AccuSport had, and he wanted to go.
mm-hmm.
But he couldn't go because it was either I go or he go. And I'm going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
that is one of the times I got my ass
he got, well, no, he didn't.
by
Buckus
both my
didn't.
dad and Kenny.
He got upset with me because of that. But I will tell you this. I don't know whether the next morning he came down to me and he said, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't realize what was happening and I was out of place. And that's Jason.
Yeah.
That's, and my wife and I always looked at Jason as kind of the son we didn't have anyway. But it's been a really, really good relationship throughout the years. And Jason will tell you about my wife was another different kind of a person. And this is Easter Sunday coming up.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
You know where
That's gotta
where my daughter and I are going?
You're going to that same.
We're going on a picnic at the Scout Club.
Yep.
We're going fishing.
It's a good way to spend.
And that's been tradition in our family. We always went on a picnic on Easter Sunday.
So that had to be 1993, and you have to understand that Linda, who's, again, she was a surrogate mother to me. I lived with them, and when I moved out and got my first apartment, she was the one with me. But we were going on an Easter picnic, and I had to drive. It was about 30 miles from where I lived to where they lived. And I drove out there, and I knew that I'd better, A, be there on time, and B, I knew the weather was horrible, and there was no way we were going on a picnic.
25 degrees.
It's snowing.
Blowing.
It's snowing.
Ohio.
And I pull in, and I'd left my coat in the car, and I walked in the door, and she said, "Where's your coat?" "Well, it's in the car." And she said, "Well, you're going to need it." I said, "What?" And she looked at both of us, and she said, "I said we're going on a picnic. We're going on a picnic."
He had tennis shoes on.
I had tennis shoes on.
So I got him a pair of boots.
Yeah.
And another insulated vest, I think, and a coat. And we went clear down to Southern Ohio in a state park. We had the place all to ourselves because nobody else was
crazy enough to be out there.
And we built a fire. And I don't remember what we had, but we
had chicken wings.
Chicken, we cooked, and we had a picnic and a bottle of wine. I think we had a martini before, and did the whole thing. And
never forget it.
Never forget it.
That
sounds pretty memorable.
You were going on a picnic, whether you wanted to go on it. She said we're going on a picnic, and that's what we were going to do.
That's not the first time we did that.
No, we did it a bunch.
Oh, boy.
That sounds, just those couple stories, it sounds like just being in that environment, a young man would pick up maybe some humbleness and some grit from the sounds of it.
Well, and one of the things he did, which he never really has admitted, but I was 22 years old, and the next closest guy in age to me in our company was 48. So, and he didn't live there. So his solution of keeping me out of trouble was every Saturday morning and every Sunday morning, "Okay, meet me at this gun club. I'll meet me at this gun club. Be there at 8. And if you weren't there at 8, you got the look when you pulled up. But he knew that would keep me out of trouble on Friday and Saturday night,
there
too.
You go.
Because recoil and hangovers don't work very well.
No, they do not.
It was great times. We had a lot of fun.
We had a lot of fun.
We did. Yes, indeed. And I still, people say to me, "Well, you're still doing that?" And I shoot sporting clays mostly every Sunday morning.
Good for you.
And during the from October to the 1st of April, I hunt pheasants every Monday morning with a couple of guys, and then now I'll start fishing every Monday morning. And sometimes on Wednesday I'd go fishing anyway during the fall. I fished all fall, all winter. We fished in the snow up there.
Got to.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And that's such a testament to what we talked about with Hornady, where our engineering team and our marketing team, everybody's passionate about it. And you carry that from the time you were shooting squirrels in the back 40 to 90 years old, still out there getting after it. That's amazing. Jason, I want to ask you that same question that we kind of heard what Ken thinks, lessons you might have learned as a young man from him. What do you think you learned most from Ken as a mentor?
Well, I learned a lot of things. One of them was you had to go work hard, and if it's not hard to outwork your competition, but you have to do the work.
Right.
And there were some jobs that I did not want to do, and there were some scenarios I'll never forget. One of the promos I worked, I had a guy. It was one of the very first ones. I had a guy walk in, and he wanted a box of a competitor's bullet. I was working the bullet bar. And I did everything I could to convince him to buy another one.
A red one.
Buy ours. And pretty soon, here came Ken Berger and Rich Vance. And I got a stern correction on, you know what? Those may have come from that factory, but they're not your bullets. They're my bullets, meaning that was Rich Vance who said it. And he was right there with them. And you're here to help us sell our bullets. It doesn't matter what's on the box. You're here to help us sell. And that was a humbling thing that you have to learn. And the only way you're going to sell more of yours is if you come up with ways to make it better. And his point and another mentor of mine was always, you make it as easy for the customer as you can. If you make it easy for the customer, he'll like you more.
That's true in a lot of facets, not just for the customer, but for all those relationships that we talked about in that whole sales chain.
And it doesn't matter what you're selling. If you're selling a box of bullets or tires or, make it easy to buy stuff and you'll sell more.
Make it easy. Bullets are more fun to sell than tires.
Oh, I think it's been a hoot. We've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, you guys. So you only worked directly for Ken for what, 4 or 5 years?
5 years. Yeah.
5 years, yeah.
5 years, and obviously did a lot of shooting, a lot of selling, probably a lot of traveling in those 5 years. Where did you go from there? And then, while you weren't working directly for Ken, that relationship, I'm guessing, stayed pretty close.
Oh yeah, very close. So the funny part, he didn't chew my ass on this one, although I think he wanted to, but it didn't take very long as a manufacturer's rep to decide you wanted to be. I was a junior rep, so I was doing more field work and met lots of sales managers. It didn't take very long to realize that I thought I could probably do better than a lot of the sales managers that were out there. So I got my name on a list. Specifically, I called one of his friends and another rep, and I said, the guy who's the sales manager at Thompson Center, I think what I said was, I want the sales manager's job at Thompson Center. And this comes back to what Ken said about how I always want to be in charge. That's true. I said, I want that job. And Charlie Duncan said, well, I don't think it's open. And I said, it should be. Well, part of this is I also knew that Ken was telling the boss of Thompson Center that he needed a new sales manager. And they offered me the job. And I went to tell him I was going to take the job. And it was my father, you've now covered my 3 mentors, said, you make sure you go talk to your existing boss before you make a decision like that, because you don't know what his plans are, which was sage advice. And so I went to talk to him and tell him I was planning on leaving, and he talked me out of it. And he didn't talk me out of it in a negative way at all. He went through, here's what we're going to be doing here, and here's what it's really like up there, and I don't think that's the right place for you. And I believe him to be true.
And it was true, because that if you'd have went to work up there under the existing circumstances up there, you'd have been a disaster.
Yeah.
It'd have been problems for you and him and everybody else.
Yeah.
So
I called a friend of mine and told him what to say and got him hooked up with Kenny. And so Greg Ritz ended up being the sales manager at Thompson Center. And a couple years later, I went to work for Redfield Rifle Scopes. And that is I did get Kenny to come rep our line for a short period of time, but that's when Redfield went bankrupt. And which is a fantastic experience to go through in business.
It was a good experience for you, though, because it ended up as he learned a lot there.
Sure.
He learned a lot, learned a whole heck of a lot.
Probably didn't feel like it at the time.
Yeah.
It hurt, but you also learn that you never want to go through it again.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
No.
What was it like on the manufacturer's rep side, repping a company that was trying to stay afloat and eventually wasn't? How was that, moving those products?
You just had to accept it. You couldn't. You realized there's nothing you could do about it. Rep agencies. When you're in a rep agency, you're always in a very precarious situation. You're always sitting on the fence, because you never know what's going to happen. And we had it happen several times with U.S. Repeating Arms was bought out. We had people at promoting. Had guy over to shoot over in Illinois, and they called us up and fired us because they had been bought out.
Mm-hmm.
And the company that bought them out said they didn't need us anymore, and you're gone. And that has happened so many times with lines. Many, many times you have a line one day, and all of a sudden they decide they get bought out, and the parent company will do their own thing, want your own. And then lots of times you'll have a line that you'll pioneer and get really going, and it grows really big, and all of a sudden the people with the company look to say, well, we're paying these guys too much money, even though we're making a lot off, and so they fire you. And that happens more than once with some big companies.
Mm-hmm.
And it always generally ends up as a mistake. But there's not many companies out there like Hornady that's as solid and was always in. And we had with the old company that I was with before we formed our own company. We had a guy there who at one time tried to talk us into resigning Hornady because he thought we were spending too much time with it. But we didn't have another company that paid us more on time and caused us less trouble and was easier to sell. And as I just said, and you know who I'm talking about. But
That's easy decision. We're going to keep.
Yeah. But the growth of Hornady's been phenomenal. And I wish I had been able to. If my wife hadn't gotten sick, I wouldn't have retired in 2005.
I've actually tried to call him back a couple times and he won't do it.
But he's got pheasant hunting and fishing.
He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
So I've been so fortunate that in my life, my avocation became a vocation. And I feel I've been very, very fortunate in being able to do that. And I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing as long as I can, as long as my 1 foot will go in front of the next one.
Tell him the biggest order you ever wrote.
Biggest order you ever wrote. Okay.
And it wasn't a Hornady order. Hell, I know this story.
The one about Shimano?
Nope.
Oh,
Also started with an H.
Humminbird, yeah.
Okay, so fishing equipment.
There was $50 million Humminbird order.
What year was this?
Yeah. It was about 19. This is what Tribute fired, from Plano.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Must have been about 1987.
Wow.
Pre-Jason.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what
87.
Humminbird had some new product.
Yeah. We had they were the first ones with a really good fish finder.
Yep.
You could really tell what was going on.
Right.
And they were a young company and came out of nowhere and made a tremendous amount of money. And at that time, we were fortunate enough to get the line. And at Outdoor Sports, I wrote a $15 million order.
That's impressive. In 1987, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know what the translation rate is, but it's in 2023. That's
was
huge.
It was big.
Yeah.
And the customer he wrote it for was called Outdoor Sports Headquarters.
Yeah.
They were the largest outdoor distributor at the time.
Okay.
In the country,
There
probably
was
in the world.
Nobody was even close as a second.
There's locations in everywhere, West Coast, Texas, Pennsylvania,
Everywhere.
Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So as a manufacturer's rep with all these lines and with as much experience as you had in the outdoor industry, you probably had a lot of influence on the industry as far as what products you would recommend, and you could probably, almost help grow these companies as an extension of the company.
Well, I used to like to think that we did, and I was always asking questions. Whenever we called on a buyer or a dealer or went in there, and we talk about different things. Oh, look at this. Boy, that's pretty good. Where'd you get that? Okay, what's that doing? How much of this you selling? What are you doing with it? What do you think is that? What do you think we need? What do you think? And from that conversations, I used to come up and I used to call your dad up and sometimes write him letters and ask for things like you need to get into the black powder bullet business.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they realized at that time before you got into how much money was to be made in that. And also the tip bullet thing was another thing which we previously discussed. And shotgun slugs. Didn't realize how big of an industry that was.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, and I gotta give the Hornady folks credit. They put their guys to work on it, and in very short times after they decided that maybe this was worthwhile after all, we had a shotgun slug, and eventually we had probably the best one out there. And this is the way that the thing is going all the way down the line from the some of the exotic cartridges that came out. I was in AccuSport one time, and they were showing me some ammunition that they'd gotten in from Federal that was maybe you shouldn't have mentioned them. That was made in Australia. Who made? What's that company?
Winchester had.
No,
Well, maybe
that time was Federal. Federal had.
Okay.
and they were 500 nitros and 480s.
Oh, yeah.
And that big stuff. And this stuff was terrible. I mean, it looked like looked awful. Didn't even look rough. Didn't even look good. And I said, you need to get into that. And that was niche stuff. And then they did. And as I said, people looked at it and it looked like jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one of the things that they did. And the progression, your guys with the 6.5, that was the most. You guys used to supply me. I started loading the 6.5 a long time ago. We started with the 6.5 284, and I found the hotter I loaded it, the better it shot for the most part. But then along came your guys and the 6.5 Creedmoor, and boy, best thing growing out there. Now you see them everywhere. It's kind of common.
Now it's
and that's just an
commonplace.
example of some of the things that happened. And it used to be on the. You remember the time we finally got your dad to make the adjustable primer seater for the 366, and he said it'd never sell. We brought 50 of them to the Grand, and we sold them the first day. And but they did listen and did make things and make adjustments on things, and it was that's a good relationship with a good company.
Yeah, that is a good relationship when you have people out there in the field that are passionate about using the product, not just selling it, and then you have a company that is also interested in making the better product.
You got to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Absolutely.
Right.
Awesome. Jace, is there anything else that while we have Ken here, that we need to pin him down and get out of him?
I think you've pinned it. Well, there's so many more stories that I could hit you with, but no, I think you got a pretty good background on one of the industry greats.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a cool insight and a really neat perspective, seeing things from, in the 50s and 60s to how they've progressed, and you're still, active in the industry till, just a few years ago. And that's a pretty unique insight, because it's getting, smaller and smaller and smaller, the amount of people that have that passion, that stayed involved for that long.
I think you're right. People don't. Well, you said the right thing, the passion for it, and this been my life. I said my avocation became my vocation.
Yeah,
and it all started with shooting barrels with a Daisy air rifle.
Yep.
And that.
I think there's a lot of us that started our passion in the outdoors with the North American Songbird Slam.
Oh, yeah, amen.
And there's very few people out there now that can say that he had the same kinds of conversations with my grandfather, and then my father, and with me. And it's when Ken talks, you better listen. And I will tell one funny story about Kenny, then I'll let it go. But Ken used to come out and pheasant hunt with us.
Oh yeah,
and we would be up with Doug Durner and my dad and several other guys. And I'll never forget the first time we were getting out of the car. My dad looks at me, grabs me, says, "You see that old man move your gun? You shoot first." It's because Kenny could shoot so fast that you weren't going to get a chance to shoot, and he was right. And there wasn't. You had to be pretty quick on a bird to outshoot Ken. Yep. You see that old man move his gun? You shoot.
Awesome. Well, Ken, one of the things that I kind of picked up on throughout our conversation is when you would refer to Hornady and some of our product developments, you oftentimes refer to it as we. You included yourself there as part of the company, and I feel like that means a lot.
I guess I did that on purpose, and as I said, I always felt that when you work for a company, you represented them, and you were they at that particular time.
Absolutely.
And of course, on the other hand, there's several companies. These guys are one that made you feel part of it.
Awesome.
And that's another thing. That's part of it too. And I could tell a couple of the stories about coming back from Denver and
maybe a different podcast.
Yeah. Well, where I was going with that was it is a family. It's a small industry as a whole, but
it's a great industry, and it's I'm so happy to have been able to be part of it, and I'm never going to give up what I'm doing, as I say.
Awesome. Well, as a representative of the company, I can tell you we appreciate you, everything you've done for us, obviously for years past and what you're doing for us now, and we really do appreciate it. And we've obviously benefited greatly because of everything that you've done.
Appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. Everyone out there, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast, catching up with a legend in the industry, somebody that's been instrumental for us as a company, Kenny Berger. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on the next one.